begin their legislative day. They will take up a measure that combines 8 bills intended to promote and preserve hunting, fishing, and shooting on public lands. We expect a debate on the rule early this afternoon, and then later today they will debate the bill itself. Now live to the House floor here on C-SPAN.
The House will be in order. Prayer will be offered by our chaplain, Father Conroy.
Let us pray. Compassionate and merciful God, we give you thanks for giving us another day. Bless the members of this people's house. Give them strength, fortitude, and patience. Fill their hearts with charity, their minds with understanding, their wills with courage to do the right thing for all of America. In the work to be done now, may they rise together to accomplish what is best for our great nation and indeed for all the world. For you have blessed us with many graces and given us the responsibility of being a light shining on a hill. May all that is done this day be for your greater honor and glory. Amen.
The Chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. Pledge of Allegiance today will be led by the gentlelady from Hawaii, Ms. Gabbard.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Chair will entertain up to 15 requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arkansas rise? Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in recognition of the service of Arkansas State University Agricultural Economics Professor Dr. Burt Greenwalt. This year marks the 20th anniversary of the Arkansas State University Agribusiness Conference, which Dr. Greenwalt has faithfully directed the past 2 decades. This premier agribusiness conference gathers attendees from across the country to focus on global agriculture, farm policy, commodity market outlooks, and biofuel research. While maintaining a global focus, Dr. Greenwalt also manages to make the conference pertinent to Arkansas's agricultural producers, regularly bringing state ag leaders and university alumni to the event. While attending Arkansas State University myself, I had the privilege of having Dr. Greenwalt as an ag policy professor, where I developed the skills necessary to serve on the Agriculture Committee in this body. Each day, serving Arkansas's 1st District, I experienced the same kinds of concepts and examples I learned in Dr. Greenwalt's classroom. Mr. Speaker, please join me and the entire Arkansas State University community in honoring the service of Dr. Burt Greenwalt.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition? And the gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, last month the Social Security Administration announced proposed plans to close the Social Security field office in Amherst, New York, among other regional offices. This proposal is both unnecessary and ill-conceived and threatens the ability of seniors, international students, and individuals with disabilities to access critical services. In response to this, I plan to introduce the Social Security Administration Accountability Act, which would require that the Social Security Administration provide Congress and local communities with adequate notice and justification for field office closings. This bill would require that Congress receive a report which includes caseload data, service population, staffing levels at field offices, as well as the process by which offices are selected for closing. Mr. Speaker, the recent FY 2014 budget appropriated an additional $11.7 billion to the Social Security Administration for administrative expenses, which should provide financial stability to alleviate the need to close field offices across the country. I urge my colleagues to support this request, and I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Florida seek recognition?
To address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker. I rise today with a heavy heart in remembrance of a dear friend and one of Miami's legal giants, Tom Tu. Tom passed away last week at the age of 73 from pancreatic cancer, an unfortunately common and terrible disease. Tom was the co-founder of Tu Cardenas Law Firm and worked closely with my husband Dexter for many years. Tom specialized in securities litigation, having represented the Florida Department of Insurance and the Securities and Exchange Commission, as well as having testified before this body on 5 occasions about securities and insurance fraud. Tom led a full life, including forming an intercollegiate boxing league and supporting the athletic program of our hometown University of Miami Hurricanes. Tom's lovely and energetic spirit will be greatly missed. He is survived by his loving daughter, Christina, brother Jeff, sister-in-law Maureen, his longtime partner Marta, and his longtime secretary Joanne. We'll miss you, Tom. You were a good friend to all. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition? For what purpose does the gentleman seek recognition?
To address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
The gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to pay tribute to my friend Victor Portugues Garcia, who passed away this weekend in Puerto Rico. Victor Portugues served as Undersecretary of Housing of Commonwealth of Puerto Rico from 1972 to 1976 and was an excellent engineer. His wife, Gilla Carmen Santa, has been a math teacher for many years, and they raised 5 children, all who graduated from prestigious universities. And I want to say to his family and to all of those who are going to miss him dearly that we are saddened by his passing and his death. To the family, to the Portugues family, we know that many people talk about infectious smiles. Victor's was truly an infectious smile. He always had something positive to say, always contributed to helping everyone else, and never asked for anything for himself. I don't know what more you can say about a human being. I know he's resting in peace, and I know that I look forward to being with him when I, too, leave this world. Thank you, Victor, for all you've done, and las pésimes con la familia Portugues. Gracias. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Hawaii seek recognition? Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On January 21st, I attended a USERPAC Sisters in Arms forum in Hawaii, and I met a warrior and a hero. Her name is Staff Sergeant Mary Valdez. I watched in awe, inspired, as she stood at attention with her right hand raised, tears streaming down her face, as she swore to defend the Constitution, to obey the orders of the President, to obey the orders of the officers over her. Her strength and love for our nation was palpable for everyone in the room, despite her having been savagely raped by a fellow soldier just weeks before her 2011 deployment to Afghanistan. She pressed charges, she took him to trial, and the man who raped her was acquitted and still serves in our United States Army today. When she spoke after her reenlistment, tears streaming down her face, she said, "I love being a soldier. I love this Army." Her courage, resilience, and commitment to fulfilling her duty is what makes our military the strongest in the world. We owe it to Staff Sergeant Valdez and all service members to bring about reforms so they're not faced with this kind of adversity. They are fulfilling their duty and their responsibility every day. We must fulfill ours. Madam Speaker, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition? And the gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to remind every member of this chamber that just over a year ago, this Congress voted to provide $50 billion in much Hurricane Sandy relief, including to my home state of New Jersey. I fought very hard for that money, and now this Congress has the responsibility and obligation to ensure that the federal Sandy recovery funds are being distributed properly to the people who need it most. Constituents from my district are still displaced from their homes and are awaiting much-needed help. According to a report released by the Fair Share Housing Center of New Jersey, low-income individuals are being denied claims at a higher rate than wealthier individuals. There is need for more transparency on the standards being used to distribute these funds. Also, a report on where and who the funds are going to is obviously needed. I urge my colleagues to make sure that proper oversight is conducted and that the funding gets to those communities who are in most dire need. And I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from California seek recognition?
Permission to address the House for 1 minute.
Gentlelady.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is the third month that my colleagues and I have asked that unemployment benefits are extended to help our communities. Those benefits expired on December 28th, and more than 1.7 million Americans, including 263,000 in California alone, have already lost access to these benefits, and another 250,000 will be hit by the end of the month if we don't act. Madam Speaker, if we act now, we can still help our friends and our neighbors who are trying to support their families as they find a new job instead of taking away what may be the only way they can afford food. There are more than 1 million Americans trying to do just that, and we should do everything we can to help them return to the workforce. Previous Congresses have extended unemployment benefits time and time again with bipartisan support. Why is it that a program that we know helps members of our community and strengthens our economy is suddenly disposable? Let me remind you that these are unemployed workers who deserve our help. I hope that we are allowed to vote on this bill and extend this vital economic lifeline.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from California seek recognition? The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to highlight the success of California with the Affordable Care Act in bringing some of the highest enrollment numbers across this nation. I'm not surprised to see California leading the way. After all, we are the Golden State. However, there is so much work still to be done by the 31st of March, which is the deadline for enrolling people this year. And I am going to work very hard along with my California colleagues. I've reached out to our Covered California Executive Director, Peter Lee, and asked him to make sure that we enroll every single eligible Californian. With only 8 weeks left for open enrollment, I am making it my top priority that every qualified resident of my 46th congressional district is given the opportunity to enroll. And I strongly encourage all of my fellow colleagues to do the same. To make good on the promise of quality and affordable health care, it's not enough to educate. We must make sure everybody is enrolled. And I give back the rest of my time.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Florida seek recognition? And the gentlelady is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I rise to urge the Republican leadership here in the House to immediately take up the bill to provide flood insurance relief to millions of Americans across the country and to develop a long-term solution for the Flood Insurance Trust Fund. Last week, the Senate passed, by a broad bipartisan vote, a bill to provide just such relief by a vote of 67 bipartisan members in the affirmative. I urge the House Republican leadership right away to take up the Senate-passed bill in the House for a vote. We already have over 182 co-sponsors, bipartisan co-sponsors, that are ready to act. Madam Speaker, there is great skepticism that this Republican-controlled House of Representatives will act to protect the middle class and to boost our economy across this country. Well, let's prove them wrong, and let's work together to pass a flood insurance relief bill as soon as possible. We can work together to solve this problem. I yield back the balance.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Hawaii seek recognition? The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Happy Lunar New Year, or as we say in Hawaii, Gung Fa Choi. This is the year of the horse, which has as one of its characteristics decisive action. It is said that it is not the year to procrastinate, and the lack of procrastination will bring success. Remember, President Obama said in his State of the Union this year that we are in the year of action. The people of this great nation has been waiting for us to show action. Some have just given up hope on us, and you just can't blame them. Let us show them that we are capable of doing the job that they sent us here to do by at least addressing critical legislation like creating jobs, restoring unemployment benefits, addressing the minimum wage, reforming the immigration system, and of course, avoiding the default. Let's show them, Madam Speaker, that we are able to do this because we can. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Florida seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, Madam Speaker.
And the gentlelady is recognized.
Madam Speaker, solving our unemployment crisis is not only about restoring our economy, it's about restoring dignity to tens of millions of Americans. Unemployment means anxiety and insecurity that translates into worse mental and physical health. Unemployment means lower lifelong learning, not only for workers but also for their children. It means a loss of dignity that's impossible to quantify. Ms. Speaker, today, with nearly 30 million Americans either unemployed or underemployed, we have a moral obligation to solve the crisis. Unemployment is rampant in both red states and blue states. Creating jobs means creating dignity. We have bipartisan options to build a full employment society, including proposals to spur public-private investments in infrastructure and close the skills gap. But we must act now. The mantra of this Congress should be, could be, and must be jobs, jobs, jobs. I yield back the balance of my time. Ms. Wilson.
Yeah.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, by direction of the Committee on Rules, I call up House Resolution 470 and ask for its immediate consideration.
And the clerk will report the resolution.
House Calendar Number 82, House Resolution 470, resolved that at any time after adoption of this resolution, the Speaker may, pursuant to Clause 2B of Rule 18, declare the House resolved into the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of the bill, H.R. 3590, to protect and enhance opportunities for recreational hunting, fishing, and shooting, and for other purposes. The first reading of the bill shall be dispensed with. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. General debate shall be confined to the bill and shall not exceed 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Natural Resources. After general debate, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. The bill shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the bill are waived. No amendment to the bill shall be in order except those printed in the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question in the House or in the Committee of the Whole. All points of order against such amendments are waived. At the conclusion of consideration of the bill for amendment, the committee shall rise and report the bill to the House with such amendments as may have been adopted. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill and amendments thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one motion to recommit with or without instructions.
Gentleman from Texas, recognized for 1 hour.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. For the purpose of the debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to the gentleman from Worcester, Massachusetts, my friend, Mr. McGovern, pending which I yield such time as I may consume. During consideration of this resolution, all time yielded for the purpose of debate only.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I want to apologize for being 2 minutes late to come here, and I apologize to not only you but also the staff and my friends from the Rules Committee for being late. Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
House Resolution 470 provides for a structured rule for consideration of H.R. 3590. This rule makes in order 11 amendments which provide for discussion and opportunities for members of the minority and the majority to participate in this debate. Yesterday in the Rules Committee, we held what I consider to be an open discussion about this bill where amendments were fully discussed and debated, and I'm pleased to say that there will be these 11 amendments as a result of the action by the Rules Committee. Madam Speaker, the bill before us today represents a year-long, bipartisan, bicameral legislative process to protect our public lands and to preserve traditional hunting, fishing, and recreational shooting for American sportsmen and sportswomen. Specifically, H.R. 3590 improves access to federal lands for hunting and fishing. It protects Second Amendment rights enshrined by the Constitution of the United States and promotes sportsmen's views, giving them a seat at a table through an innovative advisory committee to collaborate with the Secretaries of Interior and Agriculture on ways to better serve and conserve wildlife, habitat, and traditional outdoor activities. American sportsmen are some of the strongest stewards of our nation's unparalleled natural resources. We have an abundance of natural resources, but they all must be in a protected and stewardship role, and that is what the American hunter does for this country. They direct conservation projects. They establish nonprofit organizations to protect wildlife and precious habitat, and sportsmen are leading advocates to ensure that we leave a stronger, more vibrant America for future generations. And I might add that we teach our children and the next generation the same, so that the legacy that we leave is prepared for our future. Additionally, according to the 2011 National Survey of Fishing, Hunting, and Wildlife Associated Recreation, American sportsmen contribute roughly $90 billion in economic activity every year. These resources sustain thousands of American jobs and protect our nation's rich outdoor heritage. They also provide many of our rural areas of this country with needed jobs for people who live in rural areas who care very much about conservation and of their local areas to keep them natural. Unfortunately, all too often the federal government erects unnecessary barriers which prevent Americans from participating in many activities also that should be available on federal lands. That is why H.R. 3590 is important. It streamlines government regulations to allow for greater access to our nation's public lands so that all Americans can enjoy everything that our great out of doors have to offer. As a sportsman myself, I will tell you that I have enjoyed our national parks, I've enjoyed state parks, I've enjoyed the outdoors, and in particular as a young Boy Scout growing up all the way through being an Eagle Scout and an adult leader, that I have utilized these resources, which has allowed me to gain not only an opportunity to know more about America, but to be able to pass it on to my sons and others. It is a great way to spend an afternoon or a weekend or a week with your family, the out of doors, and learning more about America. Today I want to thank the Natural Resources Committee Chairman, Doc Hastings, who is from Washington. He understands the West and he understands the out of doors. His leadership on this issue was essential, as well as the Congressional Sportsmen's Caucus co-chairman, Bob Latta from Ohio and Benny Thompson from Mississippi. Both of these men met with me and the committee early on to make sure that we would be prepared for their bills that would come to the floor as a package, with the understanding that on a bicameral, bipartisan basis we would move this legislation. I urge my colleagues to vote yes on the rule and yes on the underlying legislation. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Texas reserves his time. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I want to thank the Chairman of the Rules Committee, Mr. Sessions, for yielding me the customary 30 minutes. And I rise today in opposition to the rule and the underlying bill, and I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Recognized.
Madam Speaker, this bill is a solution in search of a problem. It's an omnibus bill that has been cobbled together in a back room by the Republican leadership. While the Resources Committee has considered some of these bills, not every bill made it through the committee process. In fact, two of the measures in this bill were never reported out of committee, and no committee considered this omnibus bill. So much for regular order. Madam Speaker, we have a number of major time-sensitive issues that we should be tackling here in this Congress. We should be extending unemployment benefits for the 1.6 million Americans whose benefits expired on December 28th, and the 72,000 more who lose them each week we fail to act. We should be raising the minimum wage to help the too many Americans who work two jobs and still struggle to make ends meet. We should be finding common ground on comprehensive immigration reform to finally fix our broken immigration system. And we should be bringing to the floor a clean bill to raise the debt ceiling, which yesterday Treasury Secretary Lew said we'll hit by the end of the month. Defaulting on our national debt risks another downgrade of our credit rating. But we are not considering any of those items today. Instead, we have before us another cobbled-together lands bill that goes much further than just expanding hunting and fishing opportunities on public lands. It undermines a number of common-sense, long-standing environmental laws that protect the beautiful lands that outdoor enthusiasts love. And it's loaded up with an array of unrelated provisions, like making it easier to import polar bear trophies. Madam Speaker, let me remind my colleagues that 75% of all federal lands are open to recreational hunting, fishing, and shooting. There are ample opportunities for hunters and fishermen to pursue these recreational activities. And H.R. 3590 effectively overrides several important common-sense conservation laws and elevates hunting and shooting ahead of all other legitimate uses of land. And it does so without including several important bipartisan reauthorizations sought by outdoor sportsmen and women and conservation groups. Not only is the underlying bill bad policy, the process bringing this bill up is lousy. Despite the fact that this omnibus bill wasn't considered by any committee, the Rules Committee decided to close down the amendment process. The truth is that this rule makes in order every single Republican amendment, while only making in order one-third of the Democratic amendments. So much for openness and so much for fairness, Madam Speaker. I am particularly disappointed that last night the Rules Committee failed to make in order an amendment that I was proud to offer with Mr. Holt of New Jersey and several other of my colleagues that would have reauthorized the Land and Water Conservation Fund. The Land and Water Conservation Fund program uses royalties from oil and gas drilling to protect and preserve access to federal and state lands. The stateside program has been especially important to the creation of parks and recreational facilities in my home state of Massachusetts. The Holt Amendment reauthorizing LWCF is critical. This program will expire soon, and it needs to be reauthorized. The Holt Amendment is germane and does not require any waivers, yet the Republican leadership blocked it along with two-thirds of the other amendments offered by the Democrats. Madam Speaker, H.R. 3590 is a bill in search of a problem. We saw a similar package last year that went nowhere in the Senate, and I expect a similar fate for this year's version because gutting environmental laws is a non-starter for so many members. Madam Speaker, we should be focusing our time on the real challenges facing our economy. We should be extending unemployment insurance. It is unconscionable that we are just sitting here doing things like this, things that are going nowhere, while so many of our fellow Americans have lost their unemployment benefits. What are they to do? What are they to do? These are people looking for jobs and can't find them. We should be raising the minimum wage. We should be giving the American people a raise. My friends on the other side of the aisle complain about all these government social programs. Well, the fact is that in the United States of America, you can work full-time and still earn so little that you will require things like food stamps and other government subsidies. We should stop subsidizing places like McDonald's and Walmart who don't pay their workers a livable wage. We should raise the minimum wage. And you work in this country and you work full-time, you ought not to have to live in poverty. And we should fix our broken immigration system. And we should also pass a clean extension of the debt ceiling so that we don't ruin this economy. These are the things we should be talking about. These are the things we should be debating. Those are the priorities facing our country. And we're doing nothing. So I urge my colleagues to vote no on this rule and on the underlying bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Massachusetts reserves his time. Gentleman from Texas.
Madam Speaker, thank you very much, and I appreciate the gentleman from Massachusetts in not only his arguments, many of which were made in the Rules Committee last night as we properly went through, I believe rather meticulously, in answers to what the gentleman brought up. It is important to note that 3 Democrat amendments were withdrawn, 1 Democrat amendment was non-germane, and several other Democrat amendments, I think we effectively said they will be tackled either in another piece of legislation or because they are a larger bill that needs to be heard by the committee, updated, and in fact, the land bill is set to be done next year in 2015 with its expiration. The chairman of the committee, the gentleman Doc Hastings, very meticulously covered his thoughts and ideas about that and told the Rules Committee that, in fact, that he did believe that it would need to be updated on a bipartisan basis. Doc Hastings, as the chairman, also stated that the majority of his bills, that he had brought to the committee, at least under his chairmanship, were done on a bipartisan basis, where there was an agreement within the committee to move bills. While there may be disagreements about all piece parts of the legislation, that they garnered respect from each other out of their committee. And it was not the Republican leadership. In fact, it was the Rules Committee that made the decision based upon testimony that they heard upstairs, listening to the committee chairman, understanding the committee's thoughts and ideas, and then moving appropriately. The gentleman from Massachusetts does make other points about job bills, and I would point to a Congressional Budget Office nonpartisan CBO report that came out today that talks about the effects of a new update about the Affordable Care Act, which is known as President Obama alluded to here, Obamacare. The word Obamacare, when used in that context, will push the equivalent of about 2 million American workers out of the labor market by 2017 as employees decide either to work fewer hours or to drop out altogether, according to the latest estimates from the Congressional Budget Office. And they said that there's a major jump in the nonpartisan agency's projection, and it suggests that the health care law's initiatives and the incentives in it are driving business and people to choose government-sponsored benefits rather than work. Quote, the CBO estimates that the ACA, Affordable Care Act, will reduce the total number of hours worked on by net by about 1.5 to 2% during the period from 2017 to 2014, almost entirely because workers will choose to supply less labor given new taxes and other incentives that they will face from the financial benefits that some will receive. CBO analysts wrote this in their new economic outlook. They further stated that the rollout problems with the Affordable Care Act, known as the ACA, last year will mean that only some estimated 6 million people will sign up through the state-based exchanges rather than the 7 million that the CBO had originally said would sign up. What this means is that the laws that were passed as a result of President Obama, Nancy Pelosi being Speaker of the House, and Harry Reid as being the Senate Majority Leader, they passed laws which are substantially reducing the number of people who actually work in America. There were a net some 230,000 people that lost their job this last month. The Affordable Care Act continues to be the #1 reason why American businesses and small business employers do not hire more workers in this country. The gentleman is correct that the Democrat leadership, as well as ranking members from the Ways and Means Committee and the Budget Committee have approached the Rules Committee and asked for us to extend by 1.3 million people the number of people who would be extended long-term benefits. I had a discussion with both Sandy Levin of the Ways and Means Committee and Chris Van Hollen, the ranking member at the Budget Committee, and told them that the Republican Party in the House of Representatives has, since the President initiated this action and it was passed in the House, that we saw where there would be millions of people who would lose their jobs, that we would have unemployment at the numbers that we have, and that there's not one unintended consequence in this. These were well known, they were well understood, they were simply ignored by Democrats and the media as a possible probable outcome. So I told both these gentlemen when they came to the Rules Committee that I would be very pleased to engage with them on a private basis as a member of Congress, them as a member of Congress, on a way that we could add 1.3 million jobs if we were going to extend the unemployment compensation. I believe it is immoral for this country to have as a policy extending long-term unemployments to people rather than us working on creation of jobs. A job is the most important attribute, I believe, in a free enterprise system of a person, a family circumstance, for a husband, a wife, children when they're able at the appropriate age, to be able to have a job, to learn to take care of themselves, to be able to meet their needs, to be able to become engaged in their community and have self-respect enough to know that jobs are important. And I think too much time we have been hung up on, instead of the creation of jobs, we talk about the symptoms that are related to unemployment and long-term unemployment. In this case, the President of the United States thoughtfully articulates the need for us to make sure we help people, but I believe he errs on the side of not pushing jobs bills, coming to the table as the President, as he said he would when he was a candidate, as he should as President, of working with Republicans and Democrats on well-understood ways that you create more jobs. But the President has chosen not to do this. It continues to be a 5-year pattern. I would note that when we had many of these same issues or similar, when President Clinton was in office, he worked with Republicans, and granted, they were Republican ideas: balance the budget, welfare reform, cutting taxes, reducing rules and regulations. And I do admit that is a complete Republican agenda. But we saw where one Democrat president joined with Republicans to work for a great opportunity for us to grow our economy, to face down other nations who were willing to not only grow their economies at our expense, but to add American workers and a brighter future for all Americans. The Republican Party, House leadership, Speaker John Boehner, Majority Leader Eric Cantor, have repeatedly stood at this podium for 5 years, and we have a constant theme, and that is, let's work together. Not on raising taxes, not on more rules and regulations, not on job-killing health care ideas, but rather initiatives that the private sector, CEOs, small business leaders say will help them to understand better the things that they need to go employ Americans. Instead, the Democrat majority chose to do a bill, the Affordable Care Act, that at that time more than 55% of Americans opposed. We were told, wait till you learn about it, you're going to love this. Not just read it to learn what's in it, but the longer that you have it out there, it's going to be a real attribute. Well, let me tell you what. We're going to find out this October when instead of 8 million Americans are going to lose their health care and have to make decisions, there are going to be 80 million people. And it will be at that time, perhaps slightly before, when the American people will understand it was one party, one group of people, they are called the Republicans, who tried to warn us, who tried to hold individual, some 47 individual votes on individual pieces of the Affordable Care Act that ruin employment, that make taxes even higher, and move jobs overseas. And this is why the Republican Party is here today moving this bill. We will be with a water bill tomorrow on the floor, and we will continue down the pathway of showing the differences of what we are for. We're for the American worker. We're for growing jobs. We believe GDP is an embarrassment, and we believe that unemployment is immoral, and we should add jobs. So I'm going to join my colleague Sandy Levin, my colleague Chris Van Hollen, and we're going to see if we can craft something that we would have on this floor, but it's got to net add over 1 million jobs, because that is what America needs, a real answer, not rhetoric. I reserve my time.
Gentleman from Texas reserves his time. The gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, first of all, let me just say to my colleague from Texas, I think the Republican Party, and especially the Republican leadership in this House, should be ashamed of the obstructionism that has gone on to block every major initiative that this President has put forward to try to create jobs. And I think they should be ashamed of their indifference toward working families in this country. My colleague talks about the Affordable Care Act. Millions and millions of people now have health insurance who before did not have it. That's just a fact. You may not like it, but it's a fact. Being a woman is no longer considered a pre-existing condition with regard to health care. That's a fact. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. I would like to think my Republican colleagues would cheer that. Millions of young people can stay on their parents' insurance while they're looking for a job, so they have the security of health care. That's a good thing. Yeah, I mean, and CBO continues to say that the Affordable Care Act will reduce our deficit. And repealing it, as my Republican friends want to do, will increase the deficit. That's nuts. I repeat, what we should be talking about on this floor is extending unemployment insurance for those who have lost it. 1.6 million people lost it on December 28th. 73,000 people have lost it each additional week that has passed. The fact that we don't have the sense of urgency to do something about that is shameful. That's what we should be talking about. My colleagues say we should have a pay-for. You know, notwithstanding the fact that George Bush extended long-term unemployment benefits on a number of occasions and they never asked for a pay-for. But my colleague from Maryland, Mr. Van Hollen, came up to the Rules Committee with the pay-for, saying we would pay for it with the savings from the Farm Bill. My friend said, well, that's not enough. I don't know what is enough. How long does this indifference have to continue? We need to do immigration reform. We need to raise the minimum wage so that when you work in this country, you don't live in poverty. And with regard to the Land and Water Conservation Fund, we want to extend it for 5 years, not a year at a time. We want to give communities an opportunity to plan. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. And my friends have blocked that. My friends have blocked that. It was germane, and my Republican friends said, no, you can't have a debate and a vote on it on the House floor. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to urge that we defeat the previous question. And I will, and if we defeat the previous question, I will offer an amendment to the rule to bring up H.R. 3370, the bipartisan House companion to the flood insurance premium increase relief bill that the Senate has already passed. To discuss the, and I want to say to my guy, that's another issue. That's an issue we should be talking about now. That's more important than this bill that's before us, that's going nowhere. And to discuss the urgency of passing flood insurance relief, I yield 2 minutes to Ms. Castor of Florida.
Gentlelady from Florida, recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'd like to thank my colleague from Massachusetts for yielding the time, and also urge all of my colleagues to vote no on the rule in the previous question so that we can take up and vote on the Senate-passed bill from last week that would provide some relief to families and businesses across America from these unconscionable increases in flood insurance rates. It would also give us time to work on a bipartisan solution. Madam Speaker, for the past few months, I have offered on every single piece of legislation moving through the Rules Committee to this floor an amendment that would provide some relief to families and businesses across America on the flood insurance relief. Here's why it's important. We're dealing with the unintended consequences of a bill the Congress passed in 2012 that people were not aware of. It was going to really suck our neighbors with these high flood insurance increases. FEMA did not follow through on their responsibilities, so the best course of action now is to pause. And kudos to the Senate that passed last week by a broad bipartisan vote. 67 bipartisan members in the Senate passed a flood bill with the input of realtors, families, businesses, chambers from all across the country. It's vital that the House take up this bill right away. Let me give you a few examples from back home in the Tampa Bay area. Paul Page lives in Ruskin, Florida. He says, my name is Paul Page. I'm a retired 30% disabled veteran living in Ruskin, Florida. I need your help now. I purchased my home in December of 2012. My flood insurance was $1,400 per year, but thanks to the Bigger Waters Act of 2012, my flood insurance is rising to $5,400 per year. Please help me now. Or James Smith in Tampa, in South Tampa, owns property. His premium will go from $2,000 per year to $9,000 per year. Or Frank and Shirley Davis in Shore Acres in St. Petersburg. They just listed their home for $175,000, but they're going to have a new annual premium of $4,000 that has now negated any chance they have of selling their home. This is happening all across the country. And, Madam Speaker, this Republican majority people have called it the do-nothing Congress. They are very skeptical that the Republican-controlled Congress can respond to middle-class families and provide economic relief where it was needed. Well, here's a chance for the Republican majority to step up and address a very severe economic issue for families and businesses all across this country. The longer the Republican leadership puts this off, the greater economic harm it will cause to families and businesses across America. Vote no on the previous question and the rule.
Gentlelady's time's expired. The gentleman from Texas.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I have great respect for the gentlewoman from Florida and would like to affirm that she has come to the Rules Committee, and it is the Rules Committee that has been pondering these questions and will continue to. The Rules Committee, as of several weeks ago, attempted to work with on a bipartisan basis through the Financial Services Committee, and there were not agreements that were done there on a bipartisan basis. So I think the Committee of Jurisdiction needs an opportunity to be able to faithfully look at it and come up with an answer. I think a backstop would be, as it's done, simply to delay things 4 years because of this government's inability to effectively do what they were tasked with doing. But notwithstanding, I very much appreciate the gentlewoman and her constant comments, not just to me, but also to members of the Rules Committee, to understand that we do have to come up with an answer on this. I wish today were that answer. We'll continue to work at it, and I appreciate the gentlewoman very much for her continued insistence with me. And I have also told one of my colleagues, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Hastings, as well as members of the Rules Committee that are on the Republican side, that we'll continue to work on this, and I expect us to be successful. I reserve my time.
Gentleman from Texas reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, I think the Rules Committee ought to stop pondering and maybe start acting. And with that, I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Keating.
2 minutes from the gentleman from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I heard the gentleman from Texas say, and I appreciate his intensity, that he believes there's a flawed insurance policy that's government-sponsored. And if that's the case, then it should be delayed. And he was willing to shut down government to do it. I want to talk about something that's a flawed government insurance plan that's scientifically proven to be wrong. No debate about it. And that should be delayed, too. I have a family in my hometown in Bourne, Massachusetts, just bought a house. They bought that house for $240,000. They had a $400 bill, the predecessors did, for flood insurance. They were shocked, and I was shocked, that bill is now increased to $44,000 a year. $44,000 a year. If you take away the value of their home, in about 2 or 3 years of payments for flood insurance at that rate, it's the whole value of their home. Now, I want to also tell you that it's a government taking, in effect, I think, to have this policy in effect. Because if they go to sell that home, and someone has to get a mortgage, as most people do, to buy it, the value of that home is going to be diminished. Someone's probably going to have to pay cash and maybe pay $100,000 for a $240,000 home. That's government reaching in, taking the value of their nest egg, of all their life savings, of the place they live, away from them. Now, I said it's scientifically proven. I want to show you. I went to the University of Massachusetts in Dartmouth. Their coastal study experts there, scientists, engineers, said what FEMA did in establishing the maps where these rates are based upon are flawed. In fact, they used the Pacific Ocean methodology on the Atlantic Ocean. That's how fundamental the flaws are. Now, my county in Plymouth that I represent, by taking this through the appeals process and bringing in this study that I was able to obtain from UMass, they took the whole county of Plymouth in Massachusetts. I asked the gentleman for another 30 seconds if he'd be willing to yield that.
I yield the gentleman an additional 30 seconds.
Gentleman's yielded an additional 30 seconds.
That whole county now has this insurance plan delayed. It shouldn't just be my county in Plymouth that's delayed. And FEMA can't do this throughout the whole, there's not enough time throughout the whole country. But it should be not just my county, it should be all of Massachusetts, it should be the Northeast, it should be all the coastal areas, all the river areas in this country. They should be treated with fairness. All we need on this is a vote. There are now 182 co-sponsors, about a third of them Republicans. Let's get it to the floor, let's be fair, and when we have scientific evidence about a flawed insurance plan, let's make sure we get a vote on it.
Gentleman's time's expired. The gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I reserve my time.
Gentleman from Texas reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from California, the ranking member of the Committee on Financial Services, Ms. Waters.
Gentlelady from California for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. Madam Chair and members of Congress, we should not have to even debate this any further. It is outrageous that we have learned what we have learned about the failed implementation of FEMA with the Biggert-Waters plan and not do something about it. let me just say this. I joined with Ms. Biggert, and we tried to reform the National Flood Insurance Program. We went about it in a way that we thought would make it possible for people to be able to afford to pay for the National Flood Insurance Program, and not in a way that would cause them to lose their homes. It passed through this House, it passed through the other House, it went out to FEMA. And what did FEMA do? It did not do what we instructed them to do. First of all, we said have a study on affordability. The second thing we said was, look at the way you do mapping and remap it. We encourage them to get good data, to be able to do this work. They have failed us, and they have failed the citizens of this country. Not only have they failed the citizens of this country, middle-class people in this country, homeowners, are now about to lose their homes. California family who is facing a flood insurance premium increase from $1,700 per year up to $22,000 per year, an increase of over 1,100%. I have traveled around the country. I was down in Louisiana. We have members across the country representing Florida and New York and California, on and on and on. And they're begging this Congress to do something about these unintended consequences. I was a co-author on the bill, on the Biggert-Waters bill. I know what we attempted to do. These unintended consequences are just that. It should not be happening this way. This is not a partisan bill. This is a bill that's got support from Democrats and Republicans. You heard the previous speaker talk about 183 members on this bill. The Senate passed it out with flying colors, and now it's on us. What are we going to do? Are we going to allow middle-class families to lose their homes because FEMA has not done its job and has not done it correctly? Are we going to allow these families to be put out of homes that they've lived in for years because now, with these increased premiums, they can't sell them? This is unconscionable. We can do better than this. I could go on and tell you about the families and the letters that we have received. It's time for the House of Representatives to consider this legislation. We must address this problem now before one more family suffers from increased premiums, depressed home prices, or the inability to buy or sell their home. Bring it to the floor. I have talked with the chairman of our committee. I would like everybody to address concerns to the chairman, get this bill to the floor so that we can help our homeowners and our constituents. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady's time's expired. Gentleman from Texas.
Madam Speaker, thank you very much. In fact, once again, the gentlewoman from Los Angeles, I believe, represents a truth. We need to get this done. And I think the committee last year, as I recall, began a process of re-looking at it, trying to work through this issue. And it is my belief and hope, and I have told members of the committee that I intend to stay after this, but the Financial Services Committee, it does have the jurisdiction, and we're looking for an answer rather quickly. And I will continue to work with the gentlewoman from Los Angeles. I'll continue to work with the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Hastings, Judge Hastings, and I'll continue to work with Mrs. Castor from Tampa on this issue. I know that my dear friend from New York, Congressman Meeks, has spoken with me a number of times about this. So it is my hope that the Financial Services Committee will come with a recommendation, a piece of legislation on a bipartisan basis that we can address this, and we'll wait till that is accomplished. And that is what I have told members of the committee, and that's my hope, and I will continue to be engaged in this. I reserve my time.
Gentleman from Texas reserves his time. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, let me just say we don't have to wait for the Financial Services Committee to act. The Rules Committee shares jurisdiction on this bill. We should bring this to the floor now. With that, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Meeks.
Next.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Last week I received hundreds of calls and emails from my constituents across the Rockaway Peninsula, Broad Channel, and Jamaica Bay in New York's 5th Congressional District. Most had been struck hard by the devastation of Superstorm Sandy and were eagerly hopeful that relief was finally underway with the Senate passage of the flood insurance relief bill. My constituents then ask, how long will it take and when will the House pass the Senate bill? Why is the House not taking up the Senate bill, or why is it being delayed? When will the House leadership, let's put politics aside, because if there's ever an issue that should not involve politics, it is this issue. Because this storm struck Democrats and Republicans. It struck everybody, rich and poor. Everybody was affected by it. So when will we put those differences aside so that we can get something done? Why, they ask, Madam Speaker. It is time for us to respond to these Americans who have suffered too long and who need relief now. It is time we hear the voices of hundreds of thousands of our fellow citizens who have been devastated by the unintended consequences and the botched implementation of the Biggert-Waters Flood Insurance Act that led to dramatic increases in the cost of flood insurance. It is time that we, on this side of the Capitol, take up this legislation and address the problem before one more family suffers from increased premiums, depressed home prices, or the inability to sell their home. I hope, like what took place when we initially asked for relief for these victims, so I hope it is not the most extreme wing of the Republican Party that is blocking or stopping real relief for our nation's homeowners and pass this important reform legislation today. Madam Speaker, it is time that we pass the Homeowners Flood Insurance Act, and it's time that we get it done. We need it done today. We need it done right now for relief for American citizens. And I yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired. Gentleman from Texas.
I reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Madam Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Murphy.
Gentleman from Florida for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Last week, the Senate passed a bipartisan bill to fix the national